and thank you very much, Catherine, for her graciousness in both her curation of the touring exhibition, but also in relation to the publication of the book, which I was privileged to be included in with my essay. And I have to say that I haven't been in Wexford in, I think, about 20 years, and I just passed through it by accident. So it's like a Cork person's arrogance about superiority complex, possibly, you know, in terms of Wexford. But so I'm sorry about that. But I'm just getting to know the town and city, I suppose, as well, since yesterday evening. Yeah. So that's been an interesting experience. I'm pretty impressed so far. So it's great to see people in the flesh as well, I have to say, because I'm not a fan of Zoom myself, and I think I took part in one Zoom possibly over 18 months, and that was enough, really. I'm not inclined to participate in that sort of format, I suppose. It doesn't appeal to me, but so it's really good to see people masked and unmasked, the unmasked masses, which relates an awful lot actually to the exhibition, I think, in terms of how it might have sensitized people to thinking about faciality and thinking about the body and its materiality, from being removed from that, being removed through lockdown in our houses, but also in terms of how we perceive the face. I've been very interested in Mary Ruth's work for quite a long time. I think we were trying to figure out yesterday when we first met, and I think it was about 14 years ago, possibly even longer, it might have been 15. Those 2 years of lockdown have kind of changed my whole relationship with time. But, and it was in the WexfordArtsCentre when she had a film based on Eileen Gray's house, E1027, which was something I was very interested in. And I could see that she was dealing with concepts that I found interesting philosophically, to do with time and space and folding, the concept of folding, which I was very interested in, and a lot has been written on philosophically. So there was that connection there. And since then we've worked on a few things. Mary Ruth invited me to take part in an event we did in the Whitechapel Gallery in London, which was a co-presentation on Brian O'Doherty's Aspen, which is an absolutely fascinating and seminal work in itself. So we did that and a few other things. IMA, Mary Ruth had a residency in IMA, and I did a talk with her there, and NCAD, and a few other things like that. So, and I wrote an essay for her for this booklet, really, I suppose, called St. Patrick's Close. It was real estate, this project, which was a really fascinating project. An auctioneer's brochure. Based on Jonathan Swift, which was a really interesting project, and I will get her to talk about that in a little while, because I think, obviously with any artist's practice, if you're watching it unfold over time, it's really interesting to see certain concepts developing, expanding and contracting and shifting over time, depending on what she's dealing with. And I think the relationship with skin and surface is something that I am very interested in politically and philosophically. So that's something we will touch on a little bit. But I think to start off, I might get Mary Ruth to talk a little bit about some of her previous work, to get a sense of the kind of lineage, really, of her practice. And some of the projects in particular, I think, connect with the relationship with architecture and surface and the facade. So maybe you could describe what real estate, the project Real Estate, what that was, because it does lead into some of the subject matter here.
Yeah, I didn't expect this. I wasn't quite expecting this. Real estate was, I suppose it was things that I deal with are all come from the very, very common experience, grounded. I think I have a very practical, I think an artist has this, but I think I have a very practical sensibility. And it was housing, it was these problems and difficulty. And I used to walk from NCAD, over and back to buses and whatever. And the housing is always an issue. And I thought of Jonathan Swift, and right beside his the St. Patrick's Cathedral and Marsh's Library, there was a castellated street there called St. Patrick's Cathedral. And prior to that, I had put up a little steel blue house outside the National Archives, and it was literally just within the amount of space you could put up something without planning permission. So it was a steel blue house with no doors, no windows, and I bolted it at some ungodly hour of the night with some very kind person with some amazing drills and glues, and we just bolted it like onto the side, like a kind of guerrilla architecture. So I kind of thought, I'm going to be a guerrilla architect, this is what I'm going to do. And then Patrick's Close, when I looked at it, it was all castellated walls with sort of a pitched roofs on the top of castellated walls. So I took Marsh's Library, the image, the sort of design of it, and the way housing estates, when they buy them and there's a big house in it, they kind of look at the facade and then they kind of make these faux facades and build all these little houses around it. So I kind of use that sort of idea. And it was, every bit of the material was very important to me, so I went off with it and made a lino print of it, and then printed it in the studio beside the print studio beside Temple Bar. I'm lost for words.
Black Church?
Black Church, yeah. Sorry, I was just listening to Catherine. I'm saying, how am I going to talk after Catherine? She's just. So I printed them on lino prints and then put them all along the two sides of St. Patrick's Close, and we had an auction. We set up a tent. We right beside the Garda barracks there. They didn't throw us off. We had brochures, we had little labels, we had real estate, and we actually auctioned off. I had a real auctioneer, real solicitors, and anybody who bought a house folded up like an architectural plan, put it into an envelope and stamped it and all the various things, and off it went. It didn't become open house. No, it wasn't open house, unfortunately, at the time. So that's really, it was the surface of that. It was very interesting what people thought about it. Older people got it, and they said they could understand this play, and a lot of other people kept saying, where's the house that you're selling? And I was saying, it's just there. It's a piece of paper, but where's the real house? You know, some people couldn't. It was very interesting, but the other part of it was that people invested in it. A lot of people invested so deeply in it, and the stories. Two women wanted to know, could they come back the next day, and they wanted to buy one for their brother in Australia because he wanted to move home, but he couldn't afford a house, and they wanted number 36. There was no numbers, but we counted 36. And they were going to post that to him in Australia saying, we have a house for you in Dublin. And it was a huge amount of stories, everything from people wanting the house beside Marsh's library because it was cascading with green and growth, and they always wanted a house with a garden. And it was incredible that need and that draw for somewhere to nest and hold it as a place to think, a place to be. So it was really, but it was Jonathan. It was a play on Jonathan Swift as well, really. And when Catherine wrote this essay for me at the time that Emma commissioned, and I was saying, Catherine, this is way too much. And I've read the essay since, and she's kind of, I could say she prophesized where my practice is going. Because I was saying, Catherine, I'm not, but you actually picked up ideas of surface. And it's the last thing I thought I was thinking. I thought I was a conceptual artist and I wasn't going to do these kind of things and make work, but this is what happened, yeah.
But you had, one of the things that we shared was that you had a very intense interest in the concept of the facade in architecture, and linking it with looking at works of say Le Corbusier, people like that, and the relationship with Eileen Gray, which came up a few times. I mean, most notably Le Corbusier, obviously spent time in Eileen Gray's house, E1027, and did a mural which was completely against her wishes on the walls, which was seen as an act of aggression really by a lot of people. It's been written about by architectural theorists. But one of the things that myself and Mary Ruth have talked about a lot is certain writers on architecture who are female writers on architecture, and they bring quite a different perspective to the usual sort of references that you would tend to get in terms of talking about architecture in an art context. So Bachelard would be mentioned a lot for his book The Poetics of Space, would come up an awful lot. There are certain Anthony Vidler is another very good writer, but there are other writers, Elizabeth Gross, Beatrice Colomina is a very interesting architectural writer who has written a lot about transparency, the idea of transparency in architecture and the relationship between transparency and modernity, and this is something that you were very interested in and reading a lot about as well. So that I could see that emerging in the work you were doing at the time. But there are two short quotes that I would just like to throw out there. I like referencing people whose work I admire, so I will throw a few quotes during the conversation to just draw attention to this relationship with the body in architecture. And Elizabeth Gross, as I said, who's a writer that both of us were interested in, has said, bodies may seem absent in architecture, but they are its unspoken condition. And then a quote from Anthony Vidler, who wrote The Architectural Uncanny, where he's quoting this other architectural writer called Colin Rowe. And Colin Rowe actually says this, which seems crazy when I read it out, but it actually was a serious architectural statement. He said, when considering intercourse with a building, its face, however veiled, must always be a desirable and provocative item. So the relationship between architecture, the facade, and desire, and almost a fetishism as well, in relationship to thinking about the surface of a building, is something that has come up, I suppose, in a number of practices and texts over the years, but something that you're very preoccupied with. And you can see it in a lot of the work. And also, one of the relationships, one of the concepts that you used in real estate was the concept of miniaturization, or looking at miniaturization. And there was an interesting book by Susan Stewart on longing, which you were using, I remember at the time. And in this, it's more like gigantism, but she does talk about Swift, and Jonathan Swift, of course, was the king of miniaturization and gigantism with Gulliver's Travels. So I could see that coming through, and even, you know, when you show the little cosmetic files and things from the pharmaceutical industry, they are treated as a form of gigantism in some of the work. But maybe you could just talk a little bit about that.
The gigantism and the
well, the relationship with scale, scale. Yeah.
Oh gosh, yeah, scale.
When you were doing this work and you were thinking about the relationship with spatio-temporal kind of issues and using these tiny things but turning them into architectural objects.
One of the things that I found kind of fascinating is, and it just comes again from observing the everyday really, and it was the looking at buildings and experiencing, not so much looking, and this is where the online and the visual thing comes, you know, this is where those kind of problems play out, because we see stuff online and we see visual things, but there's absolutely no relationship whatsoever to the actual experience of those spaces. And I'm thinking of, you know, airports, shopping centres. Well, airports, we don't know what they look like anymore, but shopping centres, that kind of that plastic veneer that sort of almost moulded, and where the materials there don't age, because if they get scratched or damaged, they're just replaced. So it was also looking at the outside of them, and the buildings, like architectural buildings, airports, they particularly shopping centres, they only have a 50-year lifespan in the States, and the oldest one in Ireland, it must be 50 years old now, the Stillorgan Shopping Centre. So they have a lifespan. And then I was in shopping, you know, this is what I do when I'm shopping. I was looking at the plastic packaging, the packaging that you buy, you know, the 4 plums in, or little packets of tomatoes. And when I got these back to the studio, you know, looking at these, the relationship to the feeling and the sense of them and to the building that I experienced in real life, and this is kind of underpinning everything rather than digital and visual, you know, Zoom and screens. The real life experience of these seemed to come together with these. So I drew them up in large. I drew them in very large, and sometimes I've been putting in some vernacular architecture beside them, but I drew them very large, and they become like large buildings, and people read them as buildings. And sometimes I would show them these drawings sometimes with paint, watercolour and drawing usually, and I show them sometimes beside the miniature plastic package of this large metre-long drawing. And it's that kind of flip, and it's really, I suppose I'm just trying to find the tactility in the spaces, why we make these spaces. I'm really curious about, like, every time I see a building, my question is, why build it like that? Whether I love it or don't like it, I'm pretty obsessed with architecture, but it's really why build it like that? Like, why are contemporary buildings so in the square, the financial square in London, why are contemporary buildings so smooth and clean and that? Will I go ahead with that little bit about the skin and the buildings?
Well, one thing we were talking about earlier actually was this Walter Benjamin quote about transparency. Yeah. Walter Benjamin said that transparency was the condition of modernity. And what he was saying really wasn't that, you know, modernity led to greater transparency, but in a way, transparency was the myth that was covering or disguising or hiding a lot of what was going on in modernity. Yeah. So that the more you get a concept of transparency being put out there as a kind of assertive statement, almost you think the more that's being hidden. So with contemporary architecture, this idea of transparency, and Beatrice Colomino writes about that as well, that you have these glass facades, these glass buildings that are, you know, a lot of the large data companies would use a lot of glass as well. And the idea is that we have nothing to hide, but in a way it's because they have so much to hide that the glass is a trope, really. The idea of transparency is being used as a trope because it's happening elsewhere. It's happening elsewhere. It's not visible in that sense. So the relationship between visibility and invisibility, I think, comes up a lot in your work as well. Yeah. And this is why you use these transparent glass spheres, the plastics that you use as well, because they do seem to kind of assert some sort of truth, as if they have, again, as I said, nothing to hide, as if they are what they are, whereas in fact they are not what they are, really.
And transparency with light, particularly transparency with light as well, it has this kind of sensibility that it's, you know, as you said, that everything is revealed, and it's, you know, there's a truth in it, and it's so that's why the objects upstairs, it's called nutrient bright bodies, and it's, people have said it's half science laboratory, half cosmetic counters, half architectural proposal almost. You know, what is it? That's up to you to make your decisions, or I'd be interested if you have other ones besides it. But it's that sense of, like, it's glass, it's light, it's plastic, it's transparent, and it's really vacuous. and it's vacuous. It's from found objects I found, and bits and pieces, and some pieces got cut. But it's a vacuous object on purpose, because it's so alluring, and it's so it's the thing that we're all drawn to, and it's purposefully made like that. But it's still pretty cool. But there's nothing there's nothing in it per se. So it's really speaking about that draw that we have towards that. And it's very understandable. I mean, I'm drawn towards it hugely. That's why I'm probably so interested. But I'm asking questions. I'm really trying to unpack it in some way. Yeah.
I think the relationship between packaging the face and faciality and how we perceive faces now and architecture, I mean, there are very strong connections between those three subjects. One of the writers that you've referenced as well, who I was interested in too, was Paul B. Preciado. And he writes an awful lot about what he actually terms the sort of pornographic aspects almost of packaging, and the pharmaceutical industry, which was something that you referenced. This pharmacopornography, it's called, which is literally to do with how packaging within the pharmaceutical industry became such a sort of fetishistic thing, really. And there's a very interesting essay about the packaging of the contraceptive pill. And how that was designed to codify and regulate women in a way, because women were considered to be so sort of scatty, really, that they weren't going to remember to take that on a certain day. So they had to. The packaging of that was a groundbreaking sort of shift when it came to packaging and contemporary relationships with the body. And something we wouldn't maybe think about that much, really, the idea of the drugs that are made, the products that are made, whether it's the cosmetic industry or the medical industry, is how they're packaged and how they are presented to people, which is a huge thing. And it's something that you sort of reference in your work, this idea of that relationship, what that is. But in terms of, let's say, the film upstairs, I would like to start talking about the film. The relationship with skin, and that obviously is much more explicit, because it is, as I sort of mentioned in the essay, almost a body that has been skinned alive. It's a skinless body. So how did you come about, thinking about that and about what you wanted to produce with that film, what effects you wanted to create with that film, in relationship with the other work? What counterpoint were you trying to set up with that film?
I just felt I hadn't expressed. I was looking at all the exterior, in one sense, of the body and the skin and the pursuit of perfection, and I just felt I felt there was something missing in that body of work, or that exploration or whatever. And I was, the funny thing is, we're all human. We have skin, but our internal organs and our internal stuff, we don't like to think about it. We don't like to look at it. It's something. It's really strange, because we actually find those things kind of repellent, but they are us. They're part of our humanity, as is aging, as is all of these things. But I was trying to figure out how to express that side. And you mentioned people in your essay and some of these, I don't know some of these. I had to look up some of the artists, because Catherine has amazing research, so I've got a lot of really nice things to look at later. And some of them had all their own sort of interpretation, and quite radical. And I just felt the notion as well, I wanted to bring in the kind of cosmetic medical thing as well, and sort of unpack that. And then very simply, I'm very grounded in these senses, like soap. Soap is traditionally made from a lot of the animal fat, byproduct of meat, and it comes in. We're all meat in one sense, but I used melted animal fat. I got animal fat and I sculpted figures with it. It didn't really work. And photographed them and brought them into the film, but they didn't work. So it's only when I melted the animal fat and painted on perspex with it and photographed it and then brought it into the film that it began to work and make sense for me. Now, you can imagine the smell in the studio, but anyhow, it's really pretty disgusting to work with. But it's also attractive, and it's lubricant, and it's, so it has all these sort of counterpoints to it. But so it was using melted fat, and then using cosmetic magazines and things like that, the figures from there, and sort of repeating those. And also, a lot of these things that are sold, you're talking about the packaging, but also the advertisement, it's often based with an architectural background. So the Greek pillars, the Greek architecture is often used, and you see that on any product, and you think, oh, it's so strong, it's so perfect. It's coded for us to read in a certain manner. And that kind of annoys me, so I just took them out and used them with this other reinterpretation of the figure in animal fat. But it was also, some of it's collage, and I cut it, and it's half analog and then half digital, but it's bits of magazines. Sometimes I set up a kind of theatre set I kind of, and then photograph that and bring it in, and then sometimes I may use digital. It just all happens once you're in there.
And the text that you had commissioned for it, which is this very hypnotic, sort of seductive text as it's being performed. The writer of the text?
Olivia Fitzsimons. Yeah, I worked with her about 10 years ago. She was a show, Catherine, in the Arts Centre here. It was shopping centres. It was a kind of called Still Life, and it was really unpacking the sense of shopping centres. And it's that seduction again. And I couldn't find her for 10 years. I've been kind of hoping I would, and then she appeared up, and she's gone back to writing again. So it was really great to connect. It was like, my long lost friend, and it was really wonderful. So she wrote this text. It's that seduction of, you can make up what you wish of who's speaking, of who's saying it. But to me, it was to me. Am I ruining it to say who? To me, it was the magazines, these magazines when you open them, or the adverts, and they say, I will give you perfection, and they really seduce you, and they bring you close up to the model's face and skin, and I often think you never see somebody that close up unless they're your lover or your partner or a little child, and you kind of, it's as if this person, you're so close to them, so you're so seduced by them, and you're being sold a product. So it was really, it was really kind of, those are the ideas.
And also I think plastic surgery websites, which would be more a common thing in America, obviously coming into Ireland, but here it's not too bad. I haven't checked out any Irish ones yet. But they do create this fantasy of finding your perfect self, which becomes ridiculous, stress-inducing sort of almost duty that people feel they have to seek out their perfect self through this fantasy of perfection. There was an interesting essay in the New Yorker, I think, called "The Instagram Face." And it was about this new phenomenon the plastic surgeons are talking about, where people come in and they want a face like Instagram fillers or filters. So they're actually using the filters, and the plastic surgeons would use the filters as an example of the kind of face the person can get, which will look like the filters of Instagram. So basically people seeking out faces that are based on a completely artificial concept of the face.
An algorithm.
Totally, an inversion, you think, of what might have been a fantasy of beauty in the past. And just this idea of seeking out some kind of perfect self. And a sort of self-soothing, which comes out in the film as well, with as I said, the hypnotic sort of text that goes with it. One thing I find interesting as well is the relationship between the skin and cinema, and choosing to make a film. Let's say the fact that you chose to make a film. There's an interesting writer called Juliana Bruno who writes a lot about cinema in the city, but also in her more recent book about cinema and skin as well. And one I thought interesting historical fact I came across was that when celluloid was being developed in its original early form, it was called colloidin, and it was used as bandages for the skin. So when you look at the history of even the relationship between, say, cinema and medicine and the body, architecture and the body, there are a lot of things that overlap in ways that we might not expect. So in a sense, when somebody has a transdisciplinary practice, you'd kind of think that it's almost like an artificial forcing together of certain ideas and forms. But in fact, it's not really. I mean, historically, in the history of ideas, these things meld into each other quite naturally. They do develop alongside one another. They don't develop into the kind of highly specialized, atomized bodies of knowledge or disciplines that we might think of today. But so with the fact that you have this kind of skinless body, let's say, using the animal fats, I mean, it is as if you're trying to create a resistance to the idea of the virtual with the body in terms of the digitization of the body.
Yeah, it was exactly that, because Catherine Bowe, myself, when I was telling her my ideas, and I was using waste oil as well, like oil and plastic, etc., etc. So this black, and crude stuff that comes out of the ground becomes this incredibly seductive, transparent plastic. So there's all sorts of things I was playing with, really trying to. I was talking to Catherine Bowe, saying that this imaginary island that I'm dreaming of, this medical destination where you go and you get remade, and we're talking about bringing oil into the gallery and fat and all, and making, I just kind of got it off a bit sort of unwieldy, and so then, I used some waste oil I got Perspex box made for waste oil and put, shot some of the work on that to get that reflection. It was really pretty disgusting, but the lengths you go to try and they're all the time trying to figure it out. But I think that surface, the reason why I feel it's better on a screen as well, rather than projection, that film upstairs, it's really about the surface of the digitalized surface of the screen and the kind of the seduction of that. I mean, it's hypnotic, and so I'm using the tropes of of advertising. I'm unashamedly, purposefully using those tropes kind of against themselves, using those to kind of critique them as well. So it was, I was trying to get something into film that would be tactile, and so that's where the melted animal fat came in. It was to express tactility, express humanity, and I know it sounds very strange, but the animal fat just seemed to work for me in that way. I don't know how it works for you guys, but it certainly seemed to say what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Another strategy you use, artistic strategy you use in a lot of the works, which is a new development in your practice, is collage. And collage, a lot of people might come across collage. I mean, Hannah Hawke would be the most famous as art historical reference, but more recently, John Stetziger and Linder, artists like that who have used collage. But at the same time, your work, I think, is very different. It's not using collage just as an idea of juxtaposition. You're not just setting up images against each other to explore some sort of contradiction. It's not a binary sort of logic that you're using like that. There seems to be a connection with collage and your relationship with the cut in architecture. And you used Gordon Matta Clark as a kind of reference or an inspiration at one stage for a previous work. What was could you just say what that was? Splitting myself, I think you called it.
It was called Splitting Myself. Yeah, it's a bit mortifying in one way, but it's not another way. It's actually a work I've never shown it. Actually, I've only just. It was when I was in Goldsmiths in London. I was really kind of went in and said, I'm not, sort of anti Damien Hirst and all this kind of crack, and I was trying to find my feet in there, really. So Gordon Matta Clark is a wonderful artist. He used to in New York, and he used to cut holes in buildings, and he famously split a building. There were buildings in America made of timber, and he got car jacks and put them up on each side and split the building with the chainsaw till it opened slightly, and then photographed it of different shafts. And he was really just very gutsy work, really, really gutsy. So I took his photographs and put them together in the photocopiers in Goldsmiths, and again, I was looking for really sort of cheap material, really, kind of immediacy with it rather than the Hearst finish. I was really on a mission there. So I had then photographed myself in 5 different, a bit like Cindy Sherman, dressed up, bought the stuff in the local charity shop, and did 5 different parts of one's identity or one's whatever, and we all have, I think, far more than 5, but put those into the various rooms. So you saw the house that he had was only ever in fragments, so I remade his house, and even book leaves where the house came from are all put in, and just made this work and then put these images in. And I think it was just it was very much of the time, but I was trying to find my feet, find myself in ways, but it was, yeah. I mean, it was a cut, yeah. Yeah, and to me, the way you play with surface and use collage, I mean, it's obviously, it's very political as well, I think, because issues to do with rethinking what surface might mean, and what a surface image can do in that format when you're using, especially when you're using found images from magazines, things like that, and you're trying to interrogate them in a new way. It has come up a lot in minority practices, to do with sexuality, to do with ethnicity, to do with race. These are very contemporary issues, and let's say very much of the moment, really, these issues to do with, is it possible to rethink surface rather than just have it, as I said, in the traditional collage sense of juxtaposing images and seeing what effects might come out of that. So I'm wondering, there's Gilles Deleuze is a philosopher I like a lot in terms of his writing, and he has talked about, thinking very differently about surface. He writes about Lewis Carroll, actually, in this book, Sylvie and Bruno, and how Lewis Carroll transformed the idea of surface. And I do think, I should have a quote here somewhere from him, but it's basically looking at the idea of, surface not just being about surface and depth,
but is it possible to think about surface? And a lot of architectural theorists and architects like Peter Eisenman would be very known for this, of completely rethinking surface, not just in terms of surface and depth, but in terms of something that is outside that two-dimensional sort of relationship, that it's actually opening up other ideas. And it seems to me that you know, what you're trying to do with the ideas that you're trying to dig into is tap into that history of thinking about surface differently, you know, not just treating it as something that signifies certain things in terms of just codes, just visual codes, but trying to produce effects on another level. I mean, is that something you were aware of when you were making this work, that, you know, that it was something very much of the moment and coming up in a lot of different practices?
Very much so, Catherine. I was, you know, when you kind of start exploring, you know, particular things in the studio, you're never sure where it's going to go, and you just hope it comes together, you know, at the right time or whatever. But absolutely, it was really trying to, because of the contemporary time, I suppose. It's kind of, you know, grounded in experience. And you know, I was looking, I met a fabulous young woman, and she was just saying to me, "Oh, I'd love to have my arms lasered." And I'm looking at this fantastic, gorgeous human being, and I'm saying, "What on earth would you, you know?" And it's really, you know, trying to pursue this fashion of a perfect skin and a glass-like surface, which is the latest thing in Korea. And I was really interested in the here and now. And it was this skin that was to represent, you know, flawlessness and glass and so the surface, it's hugely problematic. These, you know, surface is hugely problematic. And it was kind of looking at that, and then, you know, it's almost the desire. You were talking about the Instagram algorithm filters that people use and want to have a face looking like an algorithm thing, which is just sort of so unhuman, and so it sort of denies your whole humanity. But I mean, the kind of ideas are obviously to sort of slightly demoralize somebody so they buy your product, you know, very clearly. But so I was kind of, you know, it's of the time, and I just felt I needed to kind of unpack that and maybe challenge that in some way, and that's. I'm not sure, Catherine, if I'm answering the questions that you're actually asking. And I
think even with even before COVID hit and before lockdown and people having to cover their faces and mask themselves, the idea of, let's say, the politics of the Google facial recognition kind of algorithms. I mean, in China, they've brought in facial analysis algorithms for people going into work in the morning, so their faces are scanned to show any signs of discontent. So there's a huge amount of standardization and quite fascistic tendencies coming in. So this idea that it's just a convenient tool is a kind of fantasy, really, because it is being used politically for certain ends. So I do think that idea of the algorithms, Harun Faraki would have been very interesting as an artist, filmmaker, thinker. Just before he died, he was really getting stuck into this, you know, looking at digital algorithms and faciality and the body. And you have writers like, or artists like Ed Atkins would be known for his intensely visceral, virtual films, which he makes with artificially constructed bodies, but they're incredibly, you know, visceral bodies. So a lot of, you know, you can see that artists are struggling with this. You know, how do you deal with the body and the materiality of the body and the physicality, the fleshiness of the body in a digital age when most people are you know, using filters, when they're using communication on their phones, using social media, that kind of thing, is where does the body fit?
Yeah, and I just want to bring up one thing, Catherine, sorry, just from the point of view of just what you're saying about algorithms. Professor Linda Doyle, who's the head of engineering in UCD, and she's a fantastic supporter of the arts, and I think she's on the board in Temple Bar, has been brought in, you know, she's so good, she's just so supportive. But she talked about algorithms, and she wants artists involved because of this digging in, these questioning, and she said, just from the point of view of an algorithm, to kind of get a sense that they're designed by people, but the information they put in is limited to their perspective. So you've got a one person, or, you know, depending on how many algorithms are, a couple of persons' perspective. And she said it was really frightening. She was in a conference, and somebody was showing in engineering at this particular algorithm, and up on stage and showing it, and everybody was wowed and thought it was great. But she said it was very clearly made by a man, because it didn't work for women or something. She, you know, it was clearly designed in a way. So she was saying as well that you can make algorithms where you have all the heavy traffic going through poorer areas where they get the pollution, and it doesn't go through more wealthy areas. You can have algorithms that, you know, decide how people live. So she was just, you know, trying to make the point that algorithms are actually, it can be a bias on your you know, poverty. It can be a bias on gender. It can be, you know, so algorithms are not just, you know, fantastic things you push the button on. Somebody designs them. So, Google designs their algorithm. So that's just something, just from a general thing, that just to have a more alertness to that. Sorry, subtext, footnotes. Sorry, go on.
One other thing I just want to touch on is the idea of the cellular plasticity, really, which comes up in your work, to do with how the pharmaceutical industry and the cosmetics industry has this discourse and this set of visual codes around the cell. And it kind of links in again with that concept of scale, which you play with a lot, which is to do with making people think about their bodies and their control of their bodies, what they can do with their bodies, but almost on a cellular level, the idea of cellular regeneration. Catherine Malibu, the philosopher, she writes a lot about this, about stem plasticity, to do with stem cells. And this is a big thing, of course, in Californian culture, where you're using your own stem cells to regenerate yourself, supposedly. That this is the idea that you're regenerating yourself using your own stem cells. And it's almost as if the body is being, you're self-exploiting, basically. You're exploiting your own body to try to endlessly regenerate your own body. But you do have this, obviously, biomedical set of references in the work, you mentioned it earlier, to do with the cellular and this idea of, even on that level, you're expected to be disciplining yourself or exploiting yourself on the cellular level. Is that something that you came across a lot when you were thinking about, plastic surgery and the body and the cosmetics industry?
Oh, totally, yeah, totally. That you express it very well, but absolutely, it's everything from the pursuit for perfection, and it's it's kind of way the way products are brought to you, that it's your very cells, it's your very minute. I also noticed two things. It's that kind of, the very cell of the body, and also it's always shown with water, another kind of transparency thing. So water, it's the purity and the transparency of water always means things are true and good, and there are things that are used, but it's that cellular. Absolutely, yeah, Catherine. It's there's one of them called the Abnormal Beauty Company, and it's literally going into that scale of the very, even regenerating the cell to, it's very much part of it all, yeah. Was I supposed to say something?
No. You mentioned to me again about the idea of the circle and spheres, and this is something we talked about before. Peter Sloterdijk, the German philosopher, wrote a 3-volume book about spheres, and about the return of the sphere as a kind of as an iconic image in contemporary culture. And it is this idea of a completely self-enclosed, perfect, entity, really, which doesn't have any angles. There's nothing problematic about it. And you do play with spheres. You have it on the screen behind us here. So that idea of using circularity and using the idea of the bubble and the sphere, that's something you've been interested in over a number of years.
Yeah, and I suppose it goes back as well, even to when we were doing the real estate project. And you do a certain amount, and then you're coming up with the quote of Jonathan Swift talking about the Great Sea, the Pacific Islands, the sugarcane, which was just pouring money into the sugarcane industry, and how it was you get your virtual, you get your piece of paper saying you owned so much, but I mean it was kind of like a virtual token, almost a bit like cryptocurrency or something. But then the South Seas,
South Seas bubble. It was just this first financial collapse, really, that occurred. And this is in the 1720s. And I think what's extraordinary about Jonathan Swift is that you're reading these quotes and thinking they could be written now, really.
Could literally have written it now.
Because he was writing about virtuality and money. Paper money was an issue at the time. That paper money was this kind of ridiculous virtual thing, just coming out of a system which was much more to do with the materiality of coinage. But
and it is that bubble, that sense of thing, but it is that perfection, it is that kind of thing. It's that surface. Again, it's the surface, it's a tension, it's you describe it very well, Catherine. I think it's absolutely it. That it's molecular as well, and also can be larger. But it's again, I think it's trying to hold a piece, an identity or something.
I'm aware as well that the people might want to ask some questions about the work if they've had the chance to see it. It would be good maybe to turn it out to the audience and get some questions. Might be good. Would anybody like to ask Mary Ruth, anything about the work? No, the artist.
Could you say a bit about the titles of your work? There's a lot of humour and tongue in cheek around the titles, especially the piece you have upstairs is called Why Tilde Why.
Oh, yeah.
And the take on the piece over here, which I love, is the Italian gymnasium, which is the most perfect gymnasium I could love. maybe you might say this about now.
Oh, okay, that's actually a good point, Elizabeth. Thanks very much indeed. Yeah, it's looking again, and these are mostly just nearly all, everything from magazines, and they're mostly cosmetic magazines, and some of them, some of them, and that one has plenty of bodies tucked into it, like statues from back in the day, and also from its beautiful Italian villa that was bought by somebody, and they transformed it into a gymnasium. And that's really what Catherine, I think, and what the work is referring to. It's kind of like it's like a kind of the Holy Grail, or like it's one of the most expensive gymnasium. You're right, Elizabeth. It's transformed into this place where you go for perfection, where you go for your body, where you go. And it was so beautifully presented in the magazine. I get seduced by these things, and that's why I can then unpack them and try to figure it out myself. But it was, and I found these beautiful paints as well. That's what's really nice with getting the time and getting the Arts Council bursary and working with Catherine Bow as well. I could get materials, and I got these incredible. If somebody told me I was going to ever paint with acrylics again, I'd say never. They're just plastic yuck. But these ones are called Golden, and they're a beautiful, amazing brand. Like each pigment has almost a different kind of texture from the way it's made. So it was really kind of putting that tactile in, and then putting this. It was really that. It was the place you go. So it was another reference within this, and yeah, there's. And Tilda upstairs, yeah, Tilda was modelling for a very particular brand. It was a very small cosmetic brand, and then it sold out to a larger Japanese cohort. And when you kind of follow I remember years and years ago somebody said to me, follow the money. And when you look at, say, global footprint in financial terms, I'm no expert, but I think it used to be arms and cars and stuff, but it's pharmaceutical, cosmetic, medical, and I hate to say, but that quasi-medical or medical cosmetic, those are really, they're up at the top, if not the top. And it's kind of, it's molecular, as you're saying, Catherine, that molecular thing, we're kind of, it's like, not like the opiates of the masses, it's kind of the cosmetic, the pharma cosmetic thing, it's kind of insidious, and I'm very aware of it, and I seem to follow it, and I sort of object to it, but it's kind of, I don't want to be kind of clichéing a pill for every ill, but it's really insidious that we're expected, not only what you're saying about the algorithms, the filter algorithms, to look like a filtered algorithm, but it's the pharma molecular level that where we're being kind of transformed, or being asked to transform. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
It's interesting too, because there's a study in Trinity from the Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging, and it's Tilda.
Oh, TILD, yeah. Oh, very well. That's really nice to know. I should have used that. I really didn't know it. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else want to make a comment or question? I think. Oh, at the back.
Oh, yes.
I'm sitting at the back, and I don't think I'm missing much, but it gets more impressionistic the further back you get. You can hear the rising chord. The point is this. What I'm hearing is about manipulation. Am I right? There's manipulation of us all. It's very much a sort of Western thing.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering where that's going. Do you have a thought about that? To what end is this manipulation going?
Okay, so I should have repeated Elizabeth's question. I was told, and the question is, do you feel it's manipulation, and where do I think the manipulation is going?
Yeah, because that's kind of the sense of this conversation to me.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That is the sense. I mean, it's not a kind of. I'm really working from sort of lived experience, and I'm working from what the people I meet, the things I see, the things I read, the people I hear, and we're all trying to kind of make sense of our worlds and ourselves. And so I'm trying to make sense of that for myself, and this is just what I see at this current moment. It's kind of, for me, it's a slice of life of what's happening now, and I don't know where it's going. I don't know. I just don't know. But it's just, I think awareness is really what's key, and I suppose that's. And the work may not appear political, but I actually feel I'm a very political artist, but although I don't have kind of flags and other things, but I feel it's very political as regards the politics of identity and the face. Yeah, but where it's going, unless anybody...
I mean, it's the story of capitalism, really, you know. I mean, it's about profit, and it's about maximising profit by whatever means can be found. But I think, I mean, you are getting some forces of resistance, obviously emerging with Facebook recently being exposed for, you know, its intent, its real intent, let's say, that it's not just this idea of a neutral social media format. So I think people, I mean, obviously you could say a lot of things are appropriated in advance, and that, you know, every act of resistance is co-opted almost as soon as it emerges. But I think the more people think about the art space actually as a means of exposing certain sort of ideas is a very important one, I think, because you're getting people to interrogate the givens of what they might see in their daily lives and take for granted as somehow normalised. And I think the kind of very subtle grooming processes that take place with people's perception, where things are normalised, is what art can really question and just trigger different ways of interrogating images.
Yeah, I get it now. It's good. And the word, I suppose, what art read awareness. So, yeah.
And it's also, you know, the exhibition we saw last night, Marie McGinney's, is, you know, that the minute I saw it, I just completely, I would say completely, got it, so much of it is like that, you know, it's the question of farming. And it's so current, you know, so it's just incredible to see the kind of the variety of current areas that are being kind of unpacked. And, you know, I found that incredibly interesting up in Wexford County Council, the street last night. Yeah, really, you know, so, and it's so, yeah, it's just so good to have these things, I think, opened and so it's probably encouraging critical thinking, really, is what, you know, and it's also kind of, I suppose it goes back to my mother there. I say it, she is such an earth woman, and she would, you know, if you come home wearing a label, she'd say, oh, you know, are you being paid to advertise for, you know? We say, no, it's a label, it's really cool. And she says, oh, well, you're actually advertising for somebody, you know. So it's that sense that you know, you become one of your tribe with different labels, and it's kind of kicking against that you know, it's very obvious kind of trend. Yeah.
In Italy, the last few years, they've started teaching, I think, 14-year-olds in school critical thinking about social media and about the internet, which I think is important. And I know Michael D. Higgins, I was involved in this project Michael D. Higgins initiated called the National Ethics Initiative, which was trying to encourage philosophy to be taught in schools, not as just a strict academic subject, but critical thinking, really, and to get in there at age 12. There's a philosopher called Aisling O'Donnell who teaches now in Maynooth. She's a professor of education there, and she's done some really interesting work, including in art spaces in Eva in Limerick. She had 10 to 12-year-olds doing basic critical thinking and philosophy. And it was really good, because at that age, actually, you know, it's a perfect age for teaching critical thinking and questioning your environment, and you know, what the motives are involved in something that's been presented to you as a product, or, you know, as a mode of existence even. Yeah. So there is some hope with that, and he's put an awful lot of effort into that, Michael D. Actually, he had a lot of meetings and seminars organised where he had some artists involved as well, artists, philosophers, teachers, educationalists, some politicians. Trying to encourage that, and I think that is actually, it is really important and necessary, really, to get young people thinking about what they're using compulsively and addictively in their hands every day, to kind of think about it and question it. But Italian society does have it's you know, it's got a right-wing government there. I mean, it's not perfect by any means, but at least it does have that. It has people with a lot of passion and idealism within the education system. So I think that's really, if you're going to speak in a utopian kind of idealistic way politically, that's what one would hope, is that you will have some kind of critical thinking.
Yeah, it'll be great
young
for
children.
Kids, yeah. Even for tinies. You know, I think you're saying in France that they even kind of the, you know, the minis in the preschool, or, you know, little very simple things that this is the way. Anyhow, sorry, this is the way life is, you know, these are the things that happen, and you kind of, there's one of the little kids coming home from preschool, and he says, yes, so-and-so says, you get what you get and you don't get upset. You know, there's a lot of, sorry, Bruno, would you mind taking that, sorry, of all the people in all the room.
It sounds like it's part of an installation or something. It's trying to tell us something, possibly.
I am it's telling us
Talking too
time is
much.
up. Yeah, it's telling us time is up. I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah,
It's hard to
I think we should, because we
Yeah.
could end up sort of solving the problems of the
I
world.
just want to
maybe.
thank you all very much. I just want to say thanks very, very much to Catherine Bowe and to Catherine Waugh. I've just worked with both of you. I was getting all my Catherine. So for such a long period of time, and to Elizabeth White and all the board, it's been an amazing support, and to all everybody who's come, thank you very, very much indeed.